This week on the Read Well podcast, we are going to pretend that you are an empty vase or vase, however you say it. And every time you read a book, you're putting a pebble into that vase. Now, I'd like to ask you a very important question this week. What are you going to do with all of those pebbles? This week, we're going to answer that question for you once and for all. What are you going to do with all this wonderful knowledge? And as always, I'm going to give you a book recommendation, and I'm very excited about this one because this may be a book that's been on your to-be-read list for a very long time, and perhaps you've just been a little scared to tackle it. It is a big book. It's a challenging book, but I promise it is worth your time. All right, let's get into it. Welcome to this week's episode of the Read Well podcast. My name is Eddie Hood, and I'm your host, where I believe it's more important to read well than to be well read. So grab your favorite book, open up your notes, and let's get ready to learn something fascinating. Hey readers, welcome back to the Read Well podcast. This is Eddie Hood, and I'm so grateful that you are here. Now, this is episode number 43, and I just can't believe we've gotten this far in the show. When I first started, I never thought I would make it this far, but it has been a wonderful experience because of each of you. I get so much feedback on a weekly basis, and it just means the world to me. In fact, we just got a new review on Apple Podcasts, a 5-star review from Crimson20, which said, I recently discovered this podcast and I'm working my way through the previous episodes. It is easy to listen to and I enjoy that it tells us to slow down. Our world is all about fast pace and big numbers, but slowing down to enjoy something is like opening a gift. I appreciate that, Crimson20. It means a lot to me that you took time out of your day to give me a review and let me know how I'm doing. Some of you may know this if you've listened to past episodes, but I have decided to go back to college. My wife is a professor at Weber State University, and it is just a wonderful experience to have her there because I found out that I get access to 6 free credit hours every month because of her employment. So I thought to myself, why not go back and get another degree? So I have, of course, decided to go back and study philosophy, the intellectual love of my life, and I'm going to be getting a minor in English literature. Now, I've been speaking with the head of the English department to try and get my application sorted out, and we got talking about books and authors that we love, and we fell on the topic of Ralph Waldo Emerson, an American philosopher and essayist. Well, he actually considered himself a poet in the 19th century, and we loved him for many reasons, but he suggested there is a book that I should read called First We Read, Then We Write. And I'm going to be referencing this book today. It is on the creative process that Emerson followed as a writer, and it's written by Robert Richardson. Now, here's the fun part about this book. It goes through the different ideologies that Emerson had when it came to thinking and writing. So if you're curious about that, this book is less than 100 pages long. It's very easy to read, and it is packed full of ideas on how to be a better reader and a better writer. Now, in this book, First We Read, Then We Write, the author, Robert Richardson, quotes a specific section where Emerson was really fascinated by some of the poets at the time, specifically a gentleman named Samuel Coleridge, who was an English poet that helped to foster or start the Romantic movement. And he was a member of what was called the Lake Poets, and this included other poets like William Wordsworth and Robert Southey. And the three of them would spend time up by the lakes in England writing poetry and thinking higher thoughts. Now, the interesting thing is that Coleridge had a system for defining the different types of readers. There are 4 types of readers, according to him, and I'm going to share these with you today, and perhaps you can decide which kind of reader you are. Now, a little bit of a spoiler alert, I have found myself being all 4 types of readers here. Some of them are, well, most of them are not good. Only one of them is really good. But it is hard to be a good reader all of the time, to always be perfect at this craft. Reading a book well takes work, it takes emotional effort, it takes focus, it takes time. And so I think we need to give ourselves a little grace when we don't get everything right. So as you listen to these 4 types of readers, consider where you're at right now and how you can improve. The first type of reader that Coleridge identifies is the hourglass. Now, this is the reader who gives back everything he or she takes in from the book unchanged. In other words, when you read the book, you're enjoying it, the words are coming into your mind space, you're kind of thinking about them for a second, and then you close the book and it's gone. It's forever gone, and nothing in your life or your thought process has changed. Just a simple process of in and then out. I have done this many times reading books where I thought, wow, this is a really great book, but I didn't take the time or the effort to notate it, to ruminate on the idea. When I was younger, I thought reading quickly was a badge of honor, and so I did this quite a lot. I don't do this nearly as much now. However, if I'm listening to a book on Audible, I am more of the hourglass reader by default because I usually am listening passively. I'll have a book in my ear when I'm washing the dishes or, mowing the lawn or something to that effect, which makes it harder for me to be a student of that work. I have nothing against audiobooks. I love them, but I try to make specific types of fiction or literature available to me on audiobooks. So if it's something I can listen to passively for entertainment purposes only, that's, for me, where audiobooks come in. The second type of reader is called the sponge. I actually think this one is sort of funny. So think of a sponge like you would wash your dishes with. Coleridge says that this type of reader is the one who takes everything in from the book and then gives back a little bit, but it's dirtier. So, you are absorbing all of the information from this book, but you're either not taking time to process it correctly and understand it, or you're adding your own personal biases to it and just getting things wrong. And so when you resend that data out to the world by teaching it or sharing it with others, you are changing it or making it dirtier than it was originally meant to be. The third type of reader is the jelly bag. Yep, think of like jelly beans, but the jelly bag. This must have been a term that was more popular back then. I'm envisioning something like an icing bag, if you were to put icing on a cake or something like that. I don't know if that visualization is correct or not, but the definition of this type of reader is one who squeezes out all of the valuable stuff and keeps the worthless. My wife used to decorate cakes all the time, and I would watch her fill these bags full of icing, and then she would pipe them onto the cake to make these beautiful roses and decorations and what have you. And in my mind, that's what Coleridge is speaking to here. All of the beautiful stuff is coming out to make roses and decorations, and then what's left inside of that icing or that piping bag is just the hard, crusty stuff that doesn't come out, is useless. This applies directly to being a reader if you take in a wonderful book and you completely miss the important concepts and latch on to the unimportant. And this can happen for a few reasons. Either A, you are reading above your level right now, and that's fine. That means you're pushing yourself mentally and you're trying to grow as a reader. This is a good thing. Or B, you are purposely ignoring the main facts because they don't agree with your current worldview. And so you tend to ignore those, and you're only looking for the stuff that agrees with what you already believe in. Therefore, that information is useless because it's just buttressing what you currently believe in. Now, that last statement may or may not be totally true. If you are researching something and you're trying to find evidence for a point you are trying to make, then it might not be worthless. But we always have to keep in mind that when we're presented with the other side of an argument, we really do need to sit down and pay attention to that, even more so than the stuff that agrees with our argument. The value comes in understanding an idea in all aspects of its circumference. The fourth type of reader, according to Coleridge, is the Golconda. And this is a word I had never heard of. I'd actually had to look this up. But Golconda simply means a source of wealth. And this is the kind of reader we aspire to be. A Golconda often refers to a mine with veins of rich minerals like gold or diamonds or what have you. And so this kind of reader will go in and run everything they read through a sieve and then keep only the nuggets. I have a friend who is a gold miner. This actually is still a thing. It's 2024 as I record this, and people still love to go out into the mountains with their gold mining pans and stand in the river and shake the rocks about until they find gold, and he occasionally will find a little, piece of something or other, but not very often. I like this imagery though, because it lends itself to the fact that he is putting in a lot of hard work to find those gold nuggets. As a critical or a rigorous reader, it's much the same, where you will work in a book, and that book might really challenge you, and it might have a lot of stuff in it that is not necessary, but you really have to dig and put in the time and sweat and effort. And if you do, you will be one of the few readers who walk away with some gold nuggets. I think this is a skill that very few have these days, and I'm not professing that I have it, although I'm trying to get better at it. I do believe, though, that the people who have truly original thoughts, who have really sort of ascended themselves and made connections that most of us can't see, these are the kind of people that read this way. So that was my first takeaway from Robert Richardson's book, First We Read, Then We Write, which is Emerson on the creative process. I just really loved the 4 types of readers. I think because I love personality tests. In school, I got an MBA, my first master's degree, my only master's degree. And when you take an MBA as a business person, they make you take all sorts of personality tests because apparently businesses love running their employees through personality tests. And I just enjoyed it. I always loved trying to figure out what type of human I was and where I fit on the scale. So this part of the book was fun for me to kind of consider how I'm doing as a reader. The second takeaway I thought you would find interesting this week is the concept of becoming drugged with books. This is a quote from Emerson, where he was always concerned with reading too much, where you never take time to consider what you're reading and you never really apply the concepts. You're just reading book after book after book. He was worried that you were drugging yourself to the point where you no longer thought for yourself. You were only collecting other people's ideas. So here's the quote. It says, "It is precisely the reader of many books who is in danger of losing sight of his own views and of becoming, as Emerson says, drugged with books for want of wisdom." There's a lot of power here. I find myself constantly drugged by books where I am so fascinated, so excited to learn something new that I'm just digging into a book. And when I'm halfway through a book, I often learn something new that makes me think, oh, I want to read this other book about this topic, which will be really interesting. And as soon as I get done with this book, I'm going to go tackle that thing. And I do. I set this book down and I go over to that book and I start reading that, and it becomes this never-ending quest for learning new stuff. But I would ask myself, and you, if you do this, am I really learning anything, or am I simply being curious and potentially wasting a lot of time in not using this information? It goes back to my original question at the very beginning of this show, which was, if we pretend you are a clear glass or vase, and every time you read a book, I put a rock into that vase, eventually that thing is going to get full. And what are you doing with all of those pebbles? The last takeaway from this book I thought you would find interesting is under the chapter titled Keeping a Journal. Emerson was a prolific writer, but he usually spent his time speaking first. He would often do college addresses at Harvard or other public gatherings, and those speeches would become his more famous essays that he would write down as he fine-tuned them. But Emerson was always a big fan of keeping a journal, of getting your thoughts on paper, so that you could collect those ideas down the road and do something useful with them. That means that a journal is not a description of the day-to-day. I love my grandma. I miss her more than anything in the world. But I was always curious about my grandma's journaling habits. She kept a journal every day, but she never wrote about anything that really happened. She always wrote about the weather. Every night when the 5 o'clock news came on, she would pull out her journal, open it up, and wait for the weatherman to say his or her spiel. And when they did, she would write down the exact temperature for the day and the forecast and so on, and then she would close the book. And I always thought that was strange and an interesting habit, and to this day, I still don't know why she did it. But I gotta be honest, people, I love that she did it because that was one of those weird, quirky things about Grandma that I will never forget. For Emerson, though, a journal is not about writing down the weather or about what you had for lunch or about the fact that you went for a walk and got your 1,800 steps in. This third takeaway on keeping a journal says this: the mature Emerson would look back on his voluminous journals as a savings bank. So there it is. Emerson was putting things into his journal as a form of savings, much like you would your retirement account. Every time he put a piece of information into his journal, he knew he would eventually use that in some way in his work down the line. Some of you may have heard the term a commonplace book. That's really what we're talking about here. Back in the day, way before computers or the internet, in Emerson's time, they didn't have access to technology, so they would keep something called a commonplace book. Many people still do this today. It's a very popular, sort of trendy thing to do in the nonfiction, book reading, note-taking space. You can look it up on YouTube and see many videos on how to keep a commonplace book. All it is a paper journal where you tend to keep this with you everywhere you go. And anytime you come across a unique saying, something interesting, something that you've learned, something related to work that you want to accomplish, this would go in your commonplace book. Again, it is a place where common stuff is held that you can rely on. And as Emerson would have said, a savings bank for your work. So with all of that in mind, I would like to challenge you to answer that one question. Considering all of the books you have read and are going to read, what will you be doing with that information? If you're simply reading to read, I would ask you if that's the best use of your time. Emerson would say it's not. And now this is interesting because Emerson was an American scholar, a philosopher, an orator, one of the smartest people that have graced our humanity. He read constantly, but he read for a reason. He didn't simply read to fill his brain with facts. You do not have to become a writer like Emerson, or I'm as well trying to become a writer. I spend every day writing the things that I learn down in my website, and I have a weekly newsletter where I sort of aggregate all these interesting things. So writing is becoming very important to me simply because of this process of taking this information and converting it into something that is useful. That might not be the case for you. Again, you might not need to be a writer, but you should be doing something with this information. And it is going to be critical for you if you want to be a better reader to answer that question. Hey everyone, I want to take just a quick second in the middle of this podcast to tell you about highlightish.com. Think of highlighting a book, but add ISH at the end. Highlightish.com is the tool that I use to make better book notes and to organize my writing. It's where I go to capture my favorite passages, annotate them, and then to turn that research into essays, blog posts, or research papers. If you're someone that wants to get more out of the books that you love and you want to turn that into great output, go to highlightish.com today. Thanks for listening, and let's get back to the show. Okay, let's get to this week's mysterious book recommendation. This is a book that may have been on your to-be-read list for many weeks or months or even years. I have a lot of people come to me and say, I've thought about reading this book, but it just terrifies me. And I get that. This is a hard book. When I read it, it took me about 6 months to get through because I was trying to read it slowly. I probably could have read it in, 2 months had I really dug into it. But I was trying to understand the concepts because not only is it a work of fiction, there is a lot of philosophy and psychology baked into this thing. The book, of course, that I'm speaking about is Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Brothers Karamazov. Now, why is The Brothers Karamazov worth your time to read? I'll give you a couple reasons why. First of all, this book is a behemoth of a book. It's over 800 pages long, and it's Russian literature. So the first thing we need to understand is that there are several translations of this book, and many of them are done poorly. The best one, in fact, it's a beautifully done one, is translated by, I can never get their names right, so be patient with me here, but Richard Pevear, Pevear, and Larissa Volchowsky, Volkhonsky. I know I said her name wrong. I know you're going to give me comments on that, but I want to let you know that that is the best translation I have found yet that is easy to read and is enjoyable to read. As for the reasons to why this book is worth your time, let's start with the fact that there are many personalities in this book, which lends itself to an interesting psychological problem. The Brothers Karamazov is a story about a father and his sons. It is a story about a family in contention, and they're in contention for several reasons, but mostly over finances and estate and the rights of, people within the family. I think this is something that many of us can relate to, because as our parents pass away and their estates are broken up or things happen of that nature, I have personally seen families who were previously loving and kind and patient tear each other apart, and it's just wild what people will do once money is involved. So at its heart, the Brothers Karamazov covers every potential human emotion you can imagine, from greed and lust to hatred to feeling serene and hopeful and excited about life. It is a wonderful book. But let's get down to these personalities. You have three major personalities that you will potentially be able to identify with. And I promise you, if you read closely, you will see yourself in at least one of these brothers. The first brother is Dmitry Karamazov. Now, Dmitry is the personality that we would call a sensualist. He is out to live life at its fullest. He is after the women and the money and living hard and wants to just suck the juice out of life, right? This is the person who is living completely on the edge and has no regard for anybody but himself. And you probably will think to yourself, that's not me. I don't relate to that personality. But I would challenge you to be honest with yourself when you read this book. I bet you at certain times in your life, depending on the situation and the interest, you may have been a little bit of a sensualist. Maybe you are giving up complete rationale to get something that you know you shouldn't buy, but you have to have it anyway. Perhaps you are completely infatuated with somebody and you don't know how to act around them. Dmitry is this really powerful personality that will knock you off your horse because he is willing to do anything to get what he wants. The next personality is Ivan, I-V-A-N. Ivan Karamazov is probably my favorite character in the Brothers Karamazov. Ivan is the intellectual. Yes, I know, I love to read, and as he speaks, he just makes me, I could spend hours with Ivan. But Ivan is also a skeptic. He does not believe in God. He is trying to figure out why his brothers are so irrational and erratic and out of control when everything for Ivan is black and white, and he simply looks at everything from an academic viewpoint. Ivan's character really has a critical role to play in this book, The Brothers Karamazov, because the author, Fyodor Dostoevsky, was a very spiritual writer. He was very much the Orthodox Christian who wanted to pervade the value of a Christ-like life. But he had to put characters in his book that would offset that would be the antagonist to those values. And I love that he did that. He held nothing back, because this is important for you as a reader. You should be able to read a book like Dostoevsky and not feel pressured to believe anything specific that he is trying to teach. Dostoevsky does a good job of showing the entire circumference of his argument and then allowing you to walk away and decide for yourself. That is another thing I love about Dostoevsky's works is, when you read a book today, lots of these stories are great because they're packed with action and they're thrillers and there's lots of love and romance and crazy things happening. Those things happen as well in Dostoevsky's books. But in addition to all of that, there is a major theme playing out. There is a philosophical idea, and if you watch out for it, you could think about the consequences of that book for years to come. In fact, if I were to be stranded on a desert island, or if I were to be put in a prison with, whatever, if I was stuck in a jail cell and I had no way to kind of entertain myself, I could probably close my eyes and think about the Brothers Karamazov and all of the crazy stuff that happens in this book. And I would have enough intellectually there to keep me sane while I was counting down the time of being released from prison or saved from the stranded island. The third personality is Alyosha. Alyosha is the youngest of the brothers, and he is essentially a monk in training. He is the spiritual part of the family, and he is the Christian part of Dostoevsky's theme. Alyosha represents all things good in humanity. He is patient. He is kind. He is willing to forgive people for their faults. And he is just this wonderful character. And he, according to Dostoevsky, was really meant to be the main character of this book. So that's the first thing you need to be aware of when you're reading The Brothers Karamazov, is that you are walking into a family with not only financial problems, but psychological and personal problems that will clash at every possible meeting. The second reason why I think The Brothers Karamazov is worth your time, even though it is big and you're going to invest a lot of work in it, are because of the parables that are baked into this book. Now, a parable by definition means that it's a story that is open to interpretation. So that's what I love about Dostoevsky's work, is he will share this concept or this idea, and then you get to walk away figuring out what it means to you based off of your experiences in life and what you have come to understand. There are many stories and parables in this book, but there are two that I really want to point out. The first is called The Grand Inquisitor, and this is a conversation, not so much a parable. This is more of a what-if scenario, where Ivan, the analytical, logical brother who does not believe in God, presents a story to his younger brother, Alyosha, who is the monk in training, the spiritual one, about whether or not God exists. Now, Fyodor Dostoevsky wants you to walk away from this book thinking that God exists. However, he leaves it open and allows you to choose. But the best part about The Grand Inquisitor is that questions are asked and an answer is given such that you walk away forced to ask that question of yourself, right? So you walk away going, wow, I hadn't thought about the existence of a creator in this way. I hadn't thought about the limitations or the possibilities that were presented. And now you are really forced to potentially acknowledge your worldview about spirituality. That is what a good book should do. It should take you as the reader by your hand and say, hey, dear reader, here are some questions you may not have thought about. Let's think about them. And that is a great thing, because if you don't have a writer do that for you, then you often go through life just believing what your society, your parents, your political persuasions have taught you to believe, and you just go along with the flow. But the moment somebody like Dostoevsky says, whoa, let's hit pause and let's ask a question, it really opens up some doors for you. And that is when you begin to think for yourself. This is why I love Dostoevsky. This is why he is my favorite fictional author of all time, because he does this wonderful magic trick behind his stories. He really forces me to think about what I believe in. Okay, hey, if you found this episode of the Read Well podcast helpful, I would love to encourage you to go to my website. It is at thereadwellpodcast.com. And the reason why you might want to go there is because every week I write personally, all by myself, a weekly newsletter on how to read deeply. I often share new and interesting things that I have learned, much like the 4 types of readers we picked up from Samuel Coleridge today. In fact, I recently wrote about that. So if you are interested in getting thoughts and ideas on how to improve your reading experience, then go to thereadwellpodcast.com and you'll see several places where you can subscribe to the newsletter. It is absolutely free. I issue that every Wednesday at 9 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, which ends up being 11 a.m. Eastern. As always, I want to thank you for being here and for being a part of the show and for sharing it with your friends. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with other people and let them know that we're here. And until next week, as always, make sure to read slowly, take notes, and apply the ideas. I'll see you next time. If you'd like to take your reading to the next level, then head on over to our website at thereadwellpodcast.com. There you can get access to my weekly newsletter as well as up-to-date show information. Also, don't forget that I learned software development on the side just so that I could build a program to help us make better book notes as we read. If you're interested, go to highlightish.com. Think of highlighting a book, but add ish, I-S-H, at the end. highlightish.com. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you on the next show.